My wife told me I had nothing to worry about. For 32 years, I believed her. Then, one afternoon, I was looking through some photos she'd taken with friends, and I saw a man in the background. At first, I didn't think much of it. Then I looked again. I knew that man. And what bothered me most wasn't that he was standing next to my wife. It was that I had trusted him too. My wife had started posting more pictures. That was the first thing I noticed. Nothing strange at first. Dinner with friends, a work gathering, somebody's birthday, a Saturday lunch. Karen had always taken pictures. But one afternoon, I was looking through one she'd posted, and I saw a man in the background. He wasn't looking at the camera, standing near the bar, half turned away. I almost scrolled past him, then I stopped. I knew that man. His name was Mark. He'd been my friend more than 10 years. And once I recognized him, I started wondering how many other pictures I'd looked at without really seeing what was in them. My name's David. I'm 60. Karen and I had been married 31 years. We had 2 grown kids, 4 grandkids, and a house we'd spent most of our marriage paying for. I worked as a maintenance supervisor at a manufacturing plant. Karen worked in administration for a healthcare company. We weren't rich, weren't struggling either. We had retirement accounts, some savings, and a plan. Stay in the house another 10 or 15 years, work as long as we needed to, then slow down. At least, that's what I thought we were doing. For most of our marriage, we were pretty ordinary. We argued about money, argued about the thermostat. We had good years and some not so good ones. There were birthdays we'd almost forgotten, and anniversaries where one of us had to stop at the grocery store on the way home. Wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And I believed there were certain things Karen would never do. A few years earlier, we'd had a rough patch. Nothing dramatic. We were just drifting. One night, sitting at the kitchen table, she'd looked at me and said, "Whatever happens, I don't want us lying to each other." I remember saying, "Me neither." She looked me straight in the eye. "I'd never do that to you." I believed her. That's the part that makes the rest hard to explain. About a year before everything fell apart, Karen started going out more. Thursday dinners, Friday drinks after work, occasional weekend events. None of it sounded unreasonable by itself, but it added up. She also got protective of her phone, changed the password. She'd take it into the bathroom. If a message came in during dinner, she'd look at the screen and turn it away. One night I said, "You've been pretty distracted lately." She didn't look up. "I'm tired, David." "Everything okay?" "Yeah." A few seconds passed. Then she said, "You worry too much." Maybe I did. I let it go. Looking back, I think part of me already knew something had changed, just wasn't ready to put a name on it. Mark had been part of our wider circle for years. I'd met him through some people from work, divorced, about my age, easygoing. The kind of guy who could walk into a room where he knew nobody and be talking to 3 people 5 minutes later. I'd trusted him. More than that, I'd talked to him about things I didn't talk about with many people. Marriage, money, work, even Karen. I remember one evening sitting in Mark's garage while he worked on an old motorcycle. He handed me a coffee. I said, "I don't know. Maybe Karen and I just need to find our way back to each other." Mark kept working. "You've got 30 years together, Dave." "Yeah, that's a long time." I nodded. Then he said, "Don't make one bad year bigger than the whole marriage." I remember believing him. That conversation came back to me later, because I had no idea he was already part of the problem. The picture that made me stop was from a restaurant. Karen had posted it on a Saturday night. 6 people around a table. Susan was there. Another couple I knew was there. Karen was smiling. Everybody looked happy. I zoomed in because I was trying to figure out where they'd eaten. Then I saw him, Mark, standing near the bar. I stared at the screen. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe there was another guy who looked like him. I went back to the picture. Same gray hair, same shoulders, same habit of leaning slightly to one side when he stood. It was Mark. I didn't confront Karen that night. Next morning, I asked casual, "How was dinner?" "Good." "Who all went?" She named a few people, Susan, Mike, a couple from work. I waited. "And Mark?" She looked at me. "Mark?" "Yeah, I thought I saw him in one of the pictures." There was a pause, maybe 2 seconds, but I noticed it. "He stopped by," she said. "At the restaurant?" "Yeah." "Wasn't he with you guys?" "No, he was there with somebody else." I nodded. "Okay." I didn't argue, but later that afternoon I went back through the pictures. I found another one from a work event 3 months earlier. Mark was in the background. Then another picture from a dinner. There he was again. Different place, different night. Same man, always somewhere in the background. I started noticing things I'd ignored. Karen said she was meeting Susan. Mark was in the picture, said it was a work dinner. Mark was there, said she'd stopped for a drink with coworkers. There was Mark. I still didn't have proof, but I had enough to stop telling myself it was nothing. One evening, Karen was in the shower. Her phone was on the kitchen counter. It buzzed. I looked at it, didn't pick it up, thought about it. For maybe 5 seconds. Then I walked away. I'd spent 31 years believing there were lines you didn't cross. Reading your wife's private messages was one of them. The next week I called Mark. We talked about 10 minutes, nothing unusual. At the end I asked, "Everything good?" "Yeah, why?" "Just checking." He laughed. "You're getting suspicious in your old age." I laughed too. After we hung up, I sat in my truck with the engine off. Couldn't explain why that conversation bothered me. He sounded normal, completely normal, and somehow that made it worse. A few days later, Karen posted another picture. This time, it was from a small coffee shop. She was sitting with Susan. I looked at the background. There was Mark, not 10 feet away. And Karen wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking at him. I put my phone down. That night, I barely slept. Next morning, I asked her, "Are you seeing Mark?" She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "No." I looked at her. "Okay. You don't believe me?" "I want to." She frowned. "David, this is ridiculous." "Maybe. You're making something out of nothing." I didn't argue. Just said, "If there's nothing going on, then I don't understand why he's in all those pictures." She looked away. And that's when I knew. Not everything, but enough. 2 days later, I asked her one question. "How many people know?" She looked at me. "What?" "About you and Mark." She sat down. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "I don't know." I stared at her. "Karen." She rubbed her forehead. "Susan knew." That hurt. "Who else?" She didn't answer. "Who else?" Mike probably knew. Probably? I don't know, David. Then I asked, how long? She looked at the table. Almost a year. Almost a year. I thought about the birthdays, the dinners, the family barbecues, the times Mark had stood in my garage asking how things were going. Thought about how many people had looked at me during that year already knowing something I didn't. That was almost harder than the affair itself. Karen said she hadn't planned for it to happen, said she'd been unhappy, said Mark made her feel noticed, said our marriage had become more like a partnership than a relationship. I didn't tell her she was wrong. Maybe some of that was true. I'd worked too much. I'd gotten comfortable. I'd quit asking questions because I figured stability meant everything was fine. But there was something I couldn't accept. She hadn't simply fallen for somebody else. She'd been living beside me while building another life, and Mark had been helping her do it. I wanted to call him, wanted him to explain himself. Instead, I went to my garage, sat on the workbench and stared at the concrete floor. Thought about that night he'd told me not to make one bad year bigger than 30 years of marriage. Thought about every time I'd trusted him. The anger was there, but underneath it was embarrassment. I wondered how many people had thought, poor David, he doesn't know. I didn't want to live like that. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to chase explanations, wasn't going to threaten Mark, wasn't going to send angry messages to people who already knew. I was going to protect myself. Next morning, I called an attorney, gathered bank statements, retirement records, mortgage papers, tax returns, changed my passwords, made copies of everything. First time in 31 years, I stopped assuming that because something belonged to both of us, we were both protecting it the same way. The divorce was painful. No dramatic courtroom scene. There were meetings, paperwork, quiet dinners, conversations with our kids that neither of us wanted to have. Karen admitted the affair, admitted she'd been planning to leave before I found out. The house had to be dealt with. The retirement accounts had to be divided. Everything went through the normal process. That was enough for me. Mark stayed with Karen a while. I never asked how long. Eventually, I stopped caring. My daughter asked me once, "Dad, did everybody know?" I looked at her. "I don't know. Does that bother you?" I thought about it. "Yeah." She nodded. "I understand." I appreciated that. I didn't want my kids choosing sides. Didn't want them carrying their mother's choices around the rest of their lives. After the divorce, I moved into a smaller house, 2-car garage, small back porch, enough room. I kept working. Weekends, I'd take my truck out early. Sometimes I'd stop for coffee. Sometimes I'd just drive. One Saturday, I ran into Susan at the grocery store. She saw me first. "David." "Hey." She looked uncomfortable. "I've wanted to talk to you." I waited. "I'm sorry." I nodded. "Okay." "I should have told you." "Yeah." She looked down at her basket. I didn't know what to do. I said, "Neither did I." Then I walked away. I wasn't suddenly okay, but I wasn't interested in carrying that conversation around anymore. A few months later, I was sitting on my back porch early one morning. My son had brought the grandkids over. Kids were running around the yard. One of them had a toy truck stuck in the grass. "Grandpa!" I looked over. "Can you get it?" I stood up. "Sure." Walked across the yard and pulled the little truck free. My grandson looked at me. "You fixed it." I smiled. "Yeah." He grabbed the truck and ran off. I sat back down. My coffee was getting cold. For a long time, I thought the worst part of betrayal was losing the person who betrayed you. Don't think that's quite right. The worst part was realizing how many things you'd believed just 'cause you trusted the people around you. And then realizing you couldn't change any of it. Couldn't change what Karen did. Couldn't change what Mark did. Couldn't change who knew. But I could decide what happened next. So I stopped looking at old pictures, stopped wondering who had known, and stopped trying to understand why people who said they cared about me had stayed quiet. The kids were still laughing in the yard. I picked up my coffee. It was cold. I drank it anyway. First time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was waiting for somebody else to tell me what my life was supposed to look like. It was mine again.